session for the 10 knowledge areas stakeholders. It's been an interesting ride. It's been a really great series. We're very happy to have you guys here and sharing it with us. And we're going to dive into our last knowledge area, which is stakeholder. We do have the chat area, so if anyone wants to comment, we are started, so you should be able to hear us. If you can't, pop into the chat box, say hello. If you're having any technical issues, pop in there. Jess is online here to help us out as always. So typical logistics here. David Donaldson, your host today again. Welcome back. Sound technology, sometimes we do have a little bit of an issue here. If you are having any issues, pop it in that chat box, say hi. Just give Jess a quick heads up there. We do record these, so if we do have any issues, you can always pick up the recording. And at the top, you have the option for raising your hands. I've already seen a couple of people raising their hands already, which is great. And we have our chat box, so I'll have that chat window open throughout the session, as well, of course, as our usual polls and questions, and of course, as always, we accept applause. So our opening thought today, and we've got a long one this time. Big Star Trek fan, guilty as charged. We're actually rewatching all of the Star Treks through Netflix, so it's kind of fun. This one comes from Scotty, Montgomery Scott. If you remember from the original series, he was the chief engineer. And Scotty was renowned for always saving the day. He was always rescuing Kirk and Spock and able to kind of pull off the impossible. His character made a reappearance in The Next Generation, and when he was talking to the new chief engineer of the new Enterprise, Geordi LaForge, he said this: "Do you mind a little advice?" And granted, it's the Scottish accent, which I won't do. I'll spare you my horrible accents. Do you mind a little advice? Starfleet captains are like children. They want everything right now, and they want it their way. The secret is to give them what they need, not what they want. And when I was putting this together, when we talk about stakeholders, big thing with stakeholders is give them what they need, not what they want. Now, as we're wrapping up this one series, we're planning our next one. I'm just going to give you a quick little heads up on that. The first in our next series, we're going to do a dynamic duo series, and the first of the dynamic duo is project management and business analyst. We've got a special guest speaker coming in for that, and the business analyst piece is all about giving people what they need and figuring out what they need and helping them find that. And if you deliver what people need, people are satisfied. If you deliver what they want, well, they'll be happy for a bit, but they won't necessarily be entirely satisfied. Now, when we talk in terms of stakeholders, it's really about managing, how satisfied they are and avoiding that disappointment. And as I was actually writing this session, I'm sitting at my computer. I'm working from home one evening, and my lovely wife says to me, "Hey, there's a new confidential opera project coming up." Now, I'm a huge musical theater fan. There's this thing called the Confidential Musical Theater Project, which is phenomenal. Google it, check it out. Send me an email if you can't find it. There's an offshoot of that, which is a Confidential Opera Project. We've been to a couple of them. They're phenomenal. So she gives me this heads up. There's new confidential. I say, cool. When? She replies back and she says, it's in March or February. Now I'm sitting at my computer. It's like 2 weeks ago, so it's kind of late February. And so I immediately Google it and I say, hey, February 28th, I'm in Newmarket that day. I can do that, right? So I'm actually in town. I'm in the country. I'm in the city. So I can totally do that. And she replied, well, no, we can't. I live northwest of the city. Newmarket's northeast, getting back and forth, back in downtown Toronto, just not going to happen. And Dolores is absolutely correct. So I'm like, bummer. And then she responds with this, and here's why I included this. She says, see, I shouldn't have told you. There wouldn't have been any disappointment. So now the point here is to align expectations with reality. We want to make sure that our stakeholders are happy. Oh, sorry. I'll come back to that in a second. I just noticed the comment there. We want to align our expectations with reality. We want to align with what we're delivering. So I want to just layer that with Scotty's comments. basically, we want to figure out what our stakeholders need. We want to plan to deliver what they need. We want to communicate effectively what we're delivering. And if the expectations on the stakeholder side are in alignment with the reality, aka what we deliver, we're going to have satisfied stakeholders. They are going to accept our deliverables. They're going to be happy with the results. They will, be wanting us back, right? So really, it's a lot of the sessions around aligning those expectations with reality. Now, we're going to do a little bit of a shift here for a moment, and we're going to launch into our first poll. And the poll here is what is the percentage of change initiatives that fail? I'm just going to open that poll up. There we go. And anytime you're doing a project, it is a change initiative. So based on research, what is the percentage that actually fail? And we're not talking about what percentage of yours fail, just this is a higher level. Okay, we'll give it a few more seconds here. We've got almost 70 people on our session today. I want to get a decent representation of the population. So we're a little over half. Some results flowing in fast and furious. All right, I'm going to end the poll here. Let's broadcast the results. 21% said 30% of projects fail. Now we're talking about the failure rate here. 28% are saying 55% of projects fail. The highest number here is 70% of projects failing, which we have 41% of our votes, so almost half. And then a relatively small number saying 90% fail. So we got a few pessimists out there, which sadly, unfortunately, in some environments that's not entirely wrong. So let's take a look. According to John Cotter's research, 70% of change initiatives fail. That is a huge number, folks. We need to do a better job here. Now, the big question now comes: what is causing those failures? And of course, there is a fair amount of what's causing those failures. So there's a fair amount of areas around that. Now, question from Steve: define fail. So I think it's a great question, and you know what? I'm going to invite. Let's do a quick impromptu poll. Let's get you to pop into the chat box here and type in, how would you define a failed project? What would you say? We're at the end of this project and it has failed, or we're judging it as a failure. How would you identify that? Multiple attendees typing. I always love seeing that. Miss scope items, fail to sustain the practice, behavior, the change you seek, from Sean. Love that one, Sean. We'll build on that in a second. Not meeting the expectations, from Mabad. Hope I got your name correctly there. Ali, not meeting the expectations. Absolutely. Customer expectations not met. We're seeing several of these expectations not met. From John, client did not accept the final deliverable. Absolutely. If the final deliverable is not accepted, your project is not over. My favorite one of all of this is that early one: we failed to sustain the practice or behavior of the change you seek, from Sean. Totally agree. Now, if we look at this from a change management perspective, totally agree, Sean. If we look at it from more of a business perspective, or excuse me, from a project management perspective, the deliverable was not accepted. The deliverable didn't do what it needed to do, aka whatever the problem, need, or opportunity was that we're addressing was not addressed, and we still had those issues. Doesn't meet stakeholder requirements, from Gerald, kind of building on that. And where was it? There was one that I wanted to highlight there. From Gabriel, does not meet the business requirements, or the business does not adopt the change. And I really wanted to point that one out, because if they don't adopt the change, and you think about those projects, where you deliver the deliverable, and even if it's what you said you were going to deliver, and it's not being used, that in my book is a failed project. So, we need to make sure that we're getting the right alignment around what the client is expecting, but we also have to be looking a little bit more around the, what is it what they need versus what they want. And we're going to go into more depth on that next time with the BA piece. From Susan, did not complete understanding the impact of the change. Absolutely, that would definitely be a causational factor there. Stakeholders' expectations were not met. And I love this one from Noel. Didn't do what we said we'd do. Absolutely, that's a huge failure. And there's one where it's actually, that's not a stakeholder issue, that's an execution issue. All right, so we're gonna put our focus today around the whole, why do projects fail piece on managing those stakeholders. So when we take a look at ProSize research from their 2009 benchmarking report, ineffective change sponsorship from senior leaders. This is dealing more with the personnel side. But I love this second one, resistance to change from employees. This is right up what we're talking about, managing your stakeholders, right? Insufficient change management resources. Again, we're not managing our stakeholders. We get that middle management resistance, poor project management, ineffective communications, and a culture that is resistant to change. So the first and the last one, kind of a little bit outside of our purview and perhaps a little bit outside of our sphere of influence. But those center ones are solidly within, stuff that we can do. So yeah, let's see what we can come up with today. Now, taking a look at PMBOK, and this is out of the stakeholder chapter. So I had a quick reread of it to gain some inspiration. And I love this opening sentence here. The ability for the project manager to correctly identify and manage these stakeholders in an appropriate manner can mean the difference between failure and success. And, and again, guilty as charged, we often get very caught up in the process. We often get very caught up in the, I need to fill in the forms. I need to fill in the, complete my BRD. I need to complete my charter. I need to create the integrated project documents. I need to, report, my weekly reporting and, all that kind of stuff. And we get caught up in all this and we forget that, at the end of the day, our projects are executed by people. We have people doing the sign-offs. We've got that acceptance perspective from our stakeholders. And if we don't manage these well, and if we don't have those acceptances, we're not going to have a good day at the end of our project. And a lot of this, ties back to that whole: are they getting what they expected to get, and B, is what they're getting what they need? Because if we're delivering things they don't need, we're wasting time and money. Okay, so with all that, we've been throwing this term stakeholder around a lot, and I know a lot of people have different terms for stakeholders. So I want to ask this simple question: what is your definition for stakeholder? So we're seeing multiple attendees typing here, which is fantastic. So lots of entries coming in real quick and fast and furious. Right out the top from Ali, anyone who's affected by the project. From Shamir, stakeholder is the customer. Individual or group that has an interest or impact on the project, from Gabriel. So expanding those first couple a little bit. From Noel, stakeholders, anyone the project touches, anyone involved in the delivery, anyone impacted by the solution. Absolutely. So expanding that definition a little bit beyond just the the people who are impacted. What's interesting, whenever I ask this question, and I see this a lot, and we've got it from Wendy, we've got it from Shamir, I'm seeing one or two others popping in here, the customer. So oftentimes when we use the word stakeholder, the word customer is associated with that. And want to be very clear, and from Setter here, expanding on that: suppliers, customers, sponsors, anyone impacted, absolutely. So one of the things that I see, and this is really why I wanted to be clear on our definition here, is there are a lot of people who, when you say the word stakeholder, they're thinking customer. And this is an area that PMBOK, PMI changed recently. well, recently it's been 2 years, with the last edition of PMBOK when they went from 4th to 5th edition, is they updated their definition of a stakeholder. And it seems like kind of a minor thing, but I wanted to kind of highlight this today. So the definition of stakeholder from PMBOK: an individual, a group, or organization, so it can be individuals, it can be groups, who may be affected by, okay, so someone who may affect the project, the decision makers, the customers, the people who define things, who may be affected by the project, so end users who receive that product, anyone who's going to interface with the product in whatever fashion. But here's the expansion that's really interesting. Or perceive itself to be affected by a decision, activity, or outcome of the project. Now, we often think in terms of stakeholders and stakeholder definition as people who are impacted by the project directly, people who impact the project, aka your decision makers, right? So you look at your sponsors, your clients, your trusted advisors, your SMEs, who are going to give you advice and give you input on the project. Totally, absolutely a stakeholder. Now, the reason PMI added this in, this extra piece of perceive itself to be impacted by the project, because here's what we're seeing in the real world. As a PM, I may look at my project and say, okay, here's all these stakeholders I identify, and then I have this group off to the side that identifies itself as being, hey, we're impacted, and I'm looking at it going, no, you're not. Now, if I take my opinion, then I'm not going to manage those stakeholders. They're not going to end up on my stakeholder register. They're not going to be communicated with. And meanwhile, they're standing there saying, hello, I'm being impacted. So it's increasing the definition to include a party, group, individual that perceives itself to be impacted. We need to accept them as a stakeholder. Now, when we look at that as a definition, this pretty much basically means that everyone in the world is a stakeholder on your project, which is kind of where it's going with this. Now, of course, if it's an internal project, it's everyone within the organization. It may include and extend into regulators, and maybe some suppliers and some external parties. If we're into a public works project, we're pretty much the entire neighborhood, the entire community. But we're not going to take every single one of those input. We're not going to react. Now, the key here is to get the buy-in. The key here is to get the participation. The key here is to get to a state where those stakeholders are getting A, what they need, B, they're kind of, and I'm going to put in air quotes, happy, so that they're not resisting the project, they're supporting it as much as is reasonable and expected. So when we get into these public works type projects where we have just like an astronomical number of stakeholders, I am not suggesting that you're going to take all of their opinions and react, but you will take them into account. You take them out of interest, okay, and hear the voices and be realistic with them. It's like, we'll hear your concerns. We'll do as much as we can to work within that. We're all working within constraints, so we need to make sure that we're delivering what is needed to the best balance of the needs of all of those stakeholders. Okay. Where are we going? That's right, there we are. There's our next question. Okay, and I think that's question 2 if I remember correctly. There we go. Awesome. Now, question, what categories would you use? So we've just been talking about, okay, stakeholders is a whole huge number of people. We need to categorize those stakeholders. What are some of the categories you might identify for your stakeholder analysis? Okay, we're getting some answers in fast and furious here. I'm loving this. So we're looking at different categories, put in one or more. We have, and I love this first one right off the top, core and extended stakeholders from Gabriel. Great high level. Let's do this subdividing. From Mabad, we can do internal, external. Yeah, absolutely. And depending upon the nature of the project, the internals will probably be more on the decision-making side. from Scott Regulators, from John S. Fringe Direct. I love this one from Angie. Who is the change champion for that stakeholder or stakeholders group? So going a little bit beyond the question there, but a good point. Once we've categorized them, we want to think about who are the people who are going to manage those stakeholders. And I have a great personal story around that, which I'll share with you guys in just a few moments. High interest, low interest, and power from Ali, and we're going to actually, it's a good one, Ali, because we'll be talking about exactly that coming up. Decision makers, high influencers, good input, those who add value, as opposed to people receiving info from Noel. Now, notice that a lot of these categories here, they're not, they're very much around the role of the job or the how they're going to impact the project. So things like users, governance, influencers, providers from Daria. The power and interest piece, because we're gonna have seen a few of those, and the internal, external, few of those as well. Those are really talking to our governance. Who's going to be the users of this, who's going to be the decision makers, etc. And from Angie as well, the stakeholder concerns. You can always group your stakeholders into concerns and areas in that way, which is another good way to look at it. So when we look at the various stakeholders, some of the categories that we suggest right off the top, are they a decision maker, are they an influencer? Because if we think about this carefully, what are we going to go to them for? Why are we keeping track of them? How are we going to manage them? Now, the client is right up there as a key category, and your client is going to play two main roles for you. The first of which is the client defines the requirements. And we want to be doing this as early as possible. And I say as early as possible because the reality is we cannot fully, completely define the requirements right at the beginning. We're going to define the requirements, and we're going to separate out the business requirements from the product. So we're talking about the why versus the project or product scope. We'll go into a lot more detail on that in our next session. But the client plays a second key role, and that second key role is around the second key role is around accepting the product when we're done. Right? We want to figure out who the client is, who we're delivering it to. Now, the client and the sponsor are often two different people. They're often the same person, so we want to kind of be aware of who's playing those roles. Now, the end user is a key stakeholder. The end user, those are the ones who are going to receive that product when we're done. We need to get this. We need to get input from them so that we can make sure that that end product is really in line with what their needs are. Our subject matter experts, our influencers, any regulators, and then, as I like to call them, the bystanders, the ones who are interested but not really participating. Okay. We also highly recommend doing the supporter resistor as part of your categorization. So I want to just go explore that a little bit. We're going to pop into our first poll here. Oops, wrong one. Our second poll here. Alrighty, let's open this poll up. Here's the question. Would you list supporter resistor as a column in your stakeholder register? Just give a few moments for you guys to vote on that. Nice, simple yes or no. So you think about your stakeholder register. You've got that nice spreadsheet with all those columns of data. Would one of those columns be supporter resistor? Okay, I'm going to end the poll here. Wow, we're getting really good results really fast. Okay, end the poll here, and I'm going to display it. Now, I'm actually really happy with these results. When I ask this question, I usually get a lot of pushback. A lot of people get freaky about this. It's like everyone totally agrees that we need to identify resistors and supporters. And this group, we've obviously got a very savvy group here. We got 74%, 74.5% actually, saying yes, you would have that in there, and then 25% no. Now, some people put in some additional comments, such as long as it is confidential, right? Not necessarily public. And this is the sticky wicket part here, folks. This is the part where people start to get a little nervous. And you know, the more I think about this and the more I look back at my history, I'm like, yeah, you know what? I don't have a problem with making that public data, because here's the facts. If I am representing you accurately and correctly, and you are in fact a resistor of the project, why is that private, right? You know, if you have an issue with the project, great, let's bring it out in the open and let's discuss it. Okay. Now, it's one of those things where you've got to decide what works in your environment. You know, there's all kinds of political stuff that starts to layer into this, and you know, yeah, and you got to decide what works for you. But I have found a lot of benefit in making it kind of more public. Now, I do just want to acknowledge, yeah, not diplomatic enough for executives. Totally hear you, Judy. You've got to look at your environment and decide, you know, how that works. But you know, have the conversations, at the very least. Have the conversations privately with those people. Say, you know what, from what I see, you're resisting this project. Embrace your resistors, because they are some of your best friends. If they are resisting for a good reason and not just the emotional, I don't like this, or you know, for political reasons, they can often, you know, give you the heads up that, hey, this isn't going somewhere that it should. So you really want to, you know, mine that data. I'm loving Gabrielle's comment here. Support or resist are too simplistic. Rather, their reaction stems from different reasons. We need to be understood and acted upon. Absolutely. Now, I'm a huge fan of simple. I would be having a supporter resistor, but then I would be having additional data to say, you know, what is the resistance and what does that look like, and I would definitely be mining and digging into that. So you're 100% correct. You know, you want to dig into that, because you need to understand that and act upon it as appropriate. Okay. The other option too is, as Sean said, you know, use levels of support rather than, you know, labeling the person. You know, whatever works for you. Now, we also have to look at you know, what is the cost benefit here, because we are talking about going into greater levels of detail, which takes more time and money and etc. You know, you've got to, you know, apply this as it makes sense for you. So we're going to go into our next poll right off the top. And this one is almost rhetorical, so I'm just going to open this up super quick. Would you deal with resistors differently than you deal with supporters? Okay, we'll just broadcast those results. I'm actually a little surprised. I got a couple people, 5 in the poll area, 5 people who are saying no, they wouldn't deal with them differently. So I'm going to invite you to pop into the chat box there. The 5 who said no, you deal with them the same. Give us a little expansion on that. I'm curious now. I was expecting 100% yes on that one, so I'm a little surprised. Keep your supporters close, your resistors closer. Love it, Scott. Yeah, we tend to shy away from our resistors because, you know, they're resisting and there's conflict, and oh my God. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of that. You know what? Go meet them for coffee. Go talk to them. Oh, Scott, you're getting some votes for being right there. Right on, Scott. Resistors must be convinced. Supporters are already sold. They can be used to convert. Totally agree. Yeah, you know, we need to support our supporters, but we need to also try to convert some of the resistors, and we'll go into a little bit of detail on that. Just as supporters, their resisting may be valid, absolutely. Yeah, and then we have also got to be careful that, you know, if we put them into too big of a group, then it becomes, you know, there may be some small pockets that have different reasons and things like that. And again, we need to look at, you know, what's our cost benefit here. There could be a maybe option. Need to know what the resistors are. Yeah, absolutely, Daria. Yeah, what the resistors needs are, absolutely, and that's exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about investigating that. We have this thing called confirmation bias within us that basically we seek out those opinions that support ours, and we kind of ignore or avoid the ones that don't. So it's yeah, we need to seek those out, and I'm loving. I think I'm going to hire Valerie. She says, "Love the challenge of converting the resistors." Yeah, but let's also temper that. Let's make sure we're not getting, you know, distracted by the squeaky wheel. So, yeah. Oh, Daria, hello, Edcar. Absolutely. So I'm just going to pop this open to a question here. And how would you deal with resistors? So we'll just pop the question box back open and ask that question. How would you deal with resistors? Effective. Now, we're going to temper that, of course, with the whole concept of, if you've got thousands of stakeholders, now we're into grouping them. The Credit Valley Conservation Authority, they run a number of parks and properties and manage them around the GTA, particularly up northwest where I live. And we actually back onto one of their parks, and they're doing a major construction project there, and there was a lot of resistance and a lot of frayed emotions. And I'm really impressed because I missed one of the meetings, and I contacted the project manager, and she offered to come out and meet with me personally. Now, we actually border on the property, so we are kind of a key stakeholder there. But I'm just really impressed that that they go to those levels, and it's paying dividends for them. It really is. Diplomacy is another from Juan. Diplomacy is another very powerful tool. Open to understand their why for resisting, from Wendy. Love that. Yes, and this really builds on our comments earlier around the whole perceived perceived impact. Increased communication. Increased communications. Listen to the concerns. Absolutely, find out the reasons for those. Oh, love this one. Pragmatic. Pedagogic explanation about project's purpose, right? Can help resistors. So, do the resistors truly understand and know why and what it is that they're doing, so do they properly understand the why of that? Now it's easy for us to understand the why because we're deep inside the project, but has it been effectively communicated? And the other key one with that, which I just want to build on, is make the why from their perspective, because we too oftentimes do the why from our perspective or from the perspective of, let's say, senior management, and now you're dealing with frontline staff, and it's a different why. We need to adjust that language. We need to adjust that focus. It goes back to the old WIIFM, and as I like to say, what's in it for me? But as I like to say, WIIFM radio station, are you tuned in? So we need to make sure that we're putting it into their context. Now, whatever your role, we all want the project to succeed. And in my experience, most resistors aren't resisting because they want the project to fail. They're resisting because they think it's wrong. They think where we're going is not going to be a benefit. And if you have a project that's going in a direction that's not going to be a benefit, then to complete the project is the wrong thing, right? And that's what's going to cause the failure. So, we all want this project to be a success. We need to be proactive. Don't wait for things to happen, because the longer you wait, the more entrenched people get. Emotions get high. We get into our position, and we kind of get entrenched. We need to be prepared to react. So if we're going to manage this effectively, we need to be prepared to react. So yes, things will go off the rails on your project. Be flexible. Have the ability to kind of adjust. And then use the tools that are available to you. Whether that's in the form of internet connections for, video teleconferencing. Hopefully they're more stable than they were today. Or if it's in the form of, internal communications, newsletters, whatever that looks like, right? So leverage those tools. Okay. Now, stakeholders, the challenge here with stakeholders' expectations is different priorities for different stakeholders. So for example, you've got the customer versus IT versus the contractor. You've got the cost priorities versus the technical excellence versus the profitability and things like that. So we're looking at this saying, I can build a much better product, but is the cost benefit there? And I often use a coffee mug as my example. So I've got a nice little porcelain coffee mug here. And you think about this as something when you go to Tim's and get your coffee, right? They give you this cheap throwaway plastic or paper mug cup, right? Well, what's the cost of my nice porcelain one here versus the cost of the throwaway one, right? We get into that whole technical excellence versus profit piece, because this is way too expensive to just give away with every single coffee. So we look at, what is the performance requirements and things like that. And we need to make sure that we're doing it in a way that makes sense so that we've got that return on investment. There's a great story of the Tucker automobile that was built so well that of the very few that were built, most of them are still running. And this is like, I think this was back in the 50s or 60s. Actually, it might even be in the 40s. A lot of these cars are still running, but the car was so expensive, no one will buy it. So we get into this whole concept of finding the right balance between, getting it right, but still making it profitable. Now, why should we care? Well, mismanage expectations. They'll reduce our project success. You know what? They'll even sink our project. So there goes SS project. And yeah. All right, moving on. It's very high-tech effects here today, folks. All right. Now, the other reason why we should care is we want our sponsors, we want our customers, we want them to want us back. And call it selfish that, I just want to keep my job. But here's the thing. If you are doing project number 2 or project number 3 or project number 4 with the same client, with the same customer, with the same sponsor, you now have the advantage of having that relationship developed with that particular person or group. And if you develop a good relationship, you can then build on that relationship. So when we talk about key skills like influencing and negotiation, you're only as good as your last influencing encounter. So if I've done a good job for you in the past, you're going to be more likely to trust me in the future. And now we start to get into some of those concepts, such as the whole, becoming a trusted advisor versus being a supplier. And this is where you're going to build confidence, you're going to build trust, there's going to be that peace of mind and reinsurance piece. And I love that comment from Valerie that just popped in, earn that political currency over time. Absolutely. I'm preaching to the choir here. All right. Back to PMBOK now. Looking at our 4 processes that we have, identify stakeholders right off at the top, get that done, get that started early. You're going to maintain that throughout. Plan your stakeholder management, figure out how we're going to deal with these folks. Manage your stakeholder engagement. Right? You can't manage stakeholders, but you can manage the engagement. So this is plan the work the plan, and then of course control how are we doing. Our focus today is going to be around planning and managing. So our plan here, basic tenet here is be proactive and have a plan. So, think it through. Now, we still need to be flexible because, it's not always going to go as planned, but the more proactive we are, the more we've thought about it ahead of time, the more we can engage some best practices. Deal with different people differently, right? One brush does not, one solution does not fit all. So, we're in this politically correct world, we're often told, treat everyone the same. I disagree. I think that's a disservice. Treat people how they need to be treated, and treat people how they're behaving, and treat people how they can, work with, so that we can, get that better reaction. Apply your resources effectively. We're looking for the biggest bang for our buck here, right? So it may be in the terms of, we're going to hear some of those inputs, but we're not going to necessarily address them all. We're going to address what we can, but hear all concerns. And then align those expectations with those deliverables. So we may not necessarily deliver exactly what you want, but you'll know what's being delivered, and you'll know what to expect. So we get into the yin and the yang of expectations. This is the written, the spoken, the clear, the easy to identify. These are the explicit ones. These are the ones we know. These are the ones that actually show up in documents like our charter and our scope statement and our integrated plan. Now, the yin, or the dark side, this is the implicit expectations. These are the unwritten. These are the unspoken. These are the difficult to identify ones. These are the assumptions that people, assume that this is included, things like that. And this is where having a really good, clear scope definition makes all the difference. Now, when I say a clear scope definition, I'm not saying big, thick, detailed definition. I'm saying clear, right? It needs to be clearly identified and communicated. The goal here is about moving implicit expectations towards explicit. And again, we're gonna explore that topic in a little bit more detail next time when we talk in terms of business analysts. Because honestly, folks, a good BA is worth their weight in gold. Absolutely. So how can we move our expectations from implicit to explicit? And let me just see if I get the right question here. Whoops, no, wrong one. There we are. How do we move our expectations? From Duncan to, I guess we've got two Duncans out there. Document, absolutely. And, PMBOK gets a lot of flack from the, it's all about documentation, but really documentation's a vehicle for communication. From Di, expanding on that, the documentation, but also gaining that agreement. From Ali, the written agreements piece, absolutely. So, and I'm actually a huge fan of the whole written agreements thing, because what happens is when you ask people to commit to paper, to actually sign it, they spend a little bit more time, they get a little bit more serious about thinking it through. From Judy, I use the assumptions concept. Publish everyone's assumptions and openly discuss them. And I'm not sure what you mean, carve them? Do them? All right. Yeah, so totally agree with that, Judy. I'm a huge fan of that as well. Write down any assumptions you have, get other people to document those assumptions, have those open discussions, right? Through the project's documents, absolutely. So, this means effort and work. Daria, I'm curious what you mean by use a playbook. If you could expand on that a little bit, I appreciate it. Communicate and document the agreements. From Setra, I totally love that you're taking it from the communication side, because we need to identify that. There's from Judy. Carve it down to the right list. Absolutely, yes. At the beginning of your project is where you want to have more, and then carve it back, right? So let's go and have those conversations. Let's make sure that we're all on the same page, and then let's dial them back to what makes sense and getting it just right. And that will take time. That will take energy and effort, and of course that costs money. Just going to give it a few more seconds. Okay. So we're going to now shift gears a little bit into managing those stakeholder expectations, or manage those stakeholder engagement, excuse me. The purpose here is to keep the people happy, right? And basically, in its highest level, simplest terms, align the expectations to the deliverables. If we deliver what we say we're going to deliver, most of the time you're going to have, if not happy, you'll have satisfied and accepting customers, or stakeholders. Updated as things change. So we need to make sure that this is a living, breathing thing. This is a dynamic thing, because we may have a customer come to us and say, here's what I need. And you go, great, I've got your needs. I now know what that is. And I'm going to go off and work on that. Their needs may change. So we want to make sure that we're having an open, two-way dialogue. But also, we may have originally started down a path for a solution that is no longer valid. And, for some reason, we can't deliver that solution, right? Be responsive to your stakeholders and treat everyone fairly and treat them honestly. Now, totally get and respect that, there's sometimes we have information we cannot divulge. If you're into a merger, if you're into a business realignment, aka a downsizing, right? But you can be honest about the fact that you have information that you can't divulge. And, you be as honest as you can, and your culture is going to drive that a little bit. But honestly, people can tell when you're not telling the truth, and if you want to create resistance, it's a great way to do it. When we're talking about managing stakeholders, this concept came up earlier. What is their power position? What is their interest? You got the high power folks, high interest. You want to manage them closely. These are the folks that can make a difference in the world, and they're paying attention. They want to know what's going on, right? Low power, low interest, minimum effort. Yeah, let's not waste a lot of time and resources here, folks. When we get the high power, low interest, these are interest kind of a neat area, because they can do stuff about it, but they're really not engaged. And if that's okay, then just keep them satisfied. Now, the low power, high interest folks, I refer to these as the big hat, no cattle. So it's, you want to keep them informed. And one of the dangers here is that if they organize. So especially if you're dealing in any kind of public works type projects, if you're dealing with sort of the people outside of your walls. So if you're coming in and putting in, let's say, a new plant or a new facility into a neighborhood, maybe a new store, a new branch, if you're in the financial district, whatever that looks like. When they have low power but they have high interest, they may organize and they may, write their local MPP and that kind of thing. And so they can work on developing their power base. So the better we manage them, the more that they will be like, okay, I'm interested, I want to know what's going on, so we keep them informed. But the less they'll be, let's organize and try to cause trouble, that kind of thing. Now, I threw this one in because this is about dealing with conflict. And the Thomas Kilmann model, it's a fabulous model. You can do an online assessment around this. And in the Thomas Kilmann model, they looked at the opposing forces of the desire to satisfy yourself and the desire to satisfy others. And if you do the assessment, what you'll find is what is your natural tendency of which corner you're going to go to. When we look at these four corners, forcing, withdrawing, smoothing, and collaborating is the corner we want to go to. Now, this can be difficult, especially in that conflict situation, which is what this is all about. We need to confront that conflict. We need to address it. We need to work with the other parties. And if we are really adverse to conflict, we may naturally tend towards the withdrawing or avoiding, at which point we're not dealing with it. Now, if we are managing this project, we do not have that luxury. We don't have the luxury to say, I'm just going to smooth and accommodate and give you what you want. I don't have the luxury of withdrawing from the conflict and avoiding it. I also don't really have the luxury of forcing it and saying, we're going ahead. I don't care about what you say. Because I'll tell you something, if you try that approach, it's not gonna come off well. It's gonna be very much a pressure creates pressure, and the more you push forward, the more that they're gonna get their nose out of joint, push back, and that's why we have consensus in under the top right corner there around how can we work with those partners, how can we address those issues, and how can we build that consensus. And while you cannot satisfy everyone, totally get that. We also want to make sure that we're addressing it as much as possible. So we may not necessarily get to a place where you want to be, but at least you've been heard and considered, and within the abilities and the constraints of the project, we've addressed those concerns. Just continuing on this whole theme of conflict, we look at the conflict scale. You're somewhere on the scale. We want to move towards problem solving. When you have conflict, you're into negotiation. When conflict increases, we get into mediation, arbitration, those kinds of nasty things. When we reduce conflict, we're moving towards problem solving. So, excuse me, as much as possible, we want to take any of those situations and try to move them into towards problem solving. Now we're working as partners with our stakeholders to try to come up with a mutually beneficial solution. So to do this, what we need to do is we need to get more in common. We need to find out what we have in common so that we can find that common ground to problem solve. Because the less we have in common, the easier it is to say, we're opposite to them, we're different than them. And a nice simple example for this, folks, is the whole agile versus waterfall. And it's not versus, it's and. There's lots and lots and lots in common between those two areas. That's a whole nother discussion, though. So I want to just ask you to take a quick look at this one here. We've got two gentlemen, we'll call them, running down a tunnel. And I want you to just do a little quick self-reflection here. We're kind of running out of time here a little bit. What is the facial expression of the first gentleman versus the second? What is the relative size of the first versus the second? And I've used this in a number of classes over the years. And here's the standard answers I get back. Well, the first guy is scared. The second guy is angry. The first guy is small, the second guy is big, and this kind of stuff. Well, let's just take a look at this. And these two images are actually exactly the same. So they are a true copy and paste, and it's the perspective of the tunnel that gives you that impression. And it's one of these things where we need to be cautious of our perception of what we think is the story based on what we're seeing. And we had some other comments earlier around the whole, disconnecting our beliefs and really opening and looking to those other ones. Now, in just our closing minutes here, we're coming back to our food for thought, to our finishing. And I'm gonna go off script here for a second. I'm gonna do a quick little sidestep here. I was at a retirement party last night. So my wife works in the court systems, and Justice Norman Douglas just finished his 20-plus career as an Ontario criminal court justice. And he's an amazing man, just an amazing man, and I was very honored to be at this event last night. But I walked out of there thinking, you know what? There's some good lessons here. So, I actually initially walked out saying I'm going to rewrite my whole thing, but of course that wasn't realistic, so I dialed it back a little bit. But I'm going to just pose this question. What do Judge D and Zappos have in common? And I already displayed the answer. What do Judge D and Zappos have in common? And now Zappos, just for the uninitiated, Zappos is an online shoe retailer. Now, here's what they have in common: blue suede shoes, of course, because Judge D is also an Elvis impersonator. And this is actually a picture from a charity event we were running where he volunteered his time and talents. And I was the sound guy, and so yeah, we've got a kind of a special connection there. But here's what they have in common: they treat their stakeholders really, really well. They treat them with kindness, they treat them with respect, and they treat them as peers. And what was amazing at Judge D's retirement last night is there was representation. Now he's a superior court judge, so he's kind of a top end here. There was representation from the entire gamut of the court systems. There was police officers. There were special constables who are effectively the police inside of the court. There was court reporters. There was clerks. There was transcriptionists. There was lawyers. Not only were there lawyers, there was defense lawyers and there was prosecution lawyers. There was fellow judges. The room, it was sold out. There was over 300 people in the room. And the theme was entirely the same from all of the speeches, including his own, which was he made a special point of thanking all of the people he worked with. And, having a bit of a window into this environment, you see some of the higher level staff, the judges and things, treating some of the lower level positions like the reporters and the clerks with very little respect. But the thing that really tweaked for me is that Judge D treated not only the staff with respect and kindness, but he treated what he called the clients of the court, the accused, and whether they were accused or even convicted, he treated them with the same kindness and respect and treated them like humans. Now, you say to me, well, what's that got to do with Zappos? Zappos does the exact same thing, and they are world famous for their hiring practices. And one of the things that they do is they have a large campus environment. So, they tell you where to park, and then they send a bus to pick you up, and there's a driver. And the driver makes idle chit chat as he drives you to your interview. You go have your interview, you hop in the bus and drive back and leave. Now, in the debrief of the interview afterwards, they talk to the driver. And if you do not treat the driver well, you don't get hired. Now, this is also the same company that while people are on probation in their initial days of their job, they are actually offered a substantial amount of money to quit. So it's an amazing place to work from everything I've read and heard. But I just wanted to tie this all back to our stakeholders. Treat your people well. Whether that is the people within your team, whether that's the stakeholders external, even the annoying ones who are bugging you because they're resisting the project and you just want to move forward and everything's going along, find a plan, and then you got this annoying person who's acting like a little child and whining about stuff. And this brings us right back to our opening thought, which is, Starfleet captains are like children. They want everything right now. They want it their way. The secret is to give them what they need, not what they want. So if we can be delivering what we need, that's when we're going to, truly have that success. And since we've come back to Montgomery, Scott, there was a comment at the beginning saying, would have been Scotty's birthday today. So Valerie, I'm guessing you're a Trekkie like myself. I didn't realize that. Didn't notice that. So let's send out a virtual happy birthday to Scotty there. And with that, I'm going to wrap things up. We did go a minute over, and I do apologize for that. Had some little technical difficulties. Just going to do a quick scan for questions. Political currency or credibility. Is this one and the same or not? I kind of see it as the same. It's kind of one of those. I think it's currency when you spend it. It's credibility when you earn it. And we're getting into a little bit of parsing words at this point, I think. But it's think about the essence of it and why you would use it and how you would use that. Yeah, yeah. So from Gabriella, lesson learned from Scotty: web connection drops when you engage hyperdrive. Yeah, we'll have to. Yeah, we're gonna have a chat with our internet provider on that one. So hopefully it never happens again. We will definitely be sending out the recording for this. Just doing a quick scan. I think we caught all the questions. Yep, I think we got them. Again, you've got my contact info, david.donaldson@titleshift.ca. There's my cell number. Hope you guys had a good time today. We're going to start a new series next month, which is the Dynamic Duo series. We'll be doing the first one of that, which is PMBOK, and then we've got some other exciting ones in the works planned for you there. Look for you guys next time. Thank you so much, and